So let's take a second look at a couple of their perspectives that we talked about during, I believe it was week 1, when we talked about the system side and the user side. And we were looking at those two with respect to how they define relevance. It turns out that these perspectives correspond roughly to the two paradigms that were pitted against each other in the Leadham article. And they also speak to the different kinds of information and the different ways of knowing and behaving that we need to think about as holistically oriented practitioners of the information professions. And what I mean by that is, like I said before, that there's really room for both perspectives. The system side necessarily calls for us to understand things in a sort of positivistic manner, to especially when we're looking at computer systems and measuring objective measures of system performance, things like that. The system side is needed. The system side includes understandings of information and the technical systems that are used to provide information, hard and or soft. So hard systems are computer systems, soft systems are processes and procedures that humans use. Either of these can be measured according to more objective or positivist types of evaluation criteria. The user side is that warm fuzzy perspective that looks more at the people who seek information and all of the characteristics of the information seeking context or the information need. So think back to the different models of the information need that we looked at during session 1 and all of the sort of factors and complexities that come into the information need, like the external environment, the socio-cultural environment. There's the role of the information seeking and the cognitive processes and affective needs of information seekers and users. If you look again at the first two paragraphs of the Lemon reading, it gives a pretty good compare and contrast and definition of the system-oriented perspective and the user-oriented perspective. I'll also remind you about the system-oriented and user-oriented definitions of relevance. The system-oriented definition of relevance is that relevance is the relationship between a query and a document. So it's not looking at the underlying information need or the socio-cultural context or anything like that. It's just looking at the query and whether the system did an appropriate job of matching the query to the available information in the system. The user-oriented definition of relevance is that relevance is the relationship between an information need and a document. So the user-oriented definition of relevance is taking into account the situation, the dynamic aspect of the information need, that whole concept of pertinence that we talked about during the last session, that says that something might be relevant according to the system view, but it's not pertinent if it doesn't match the current situation. For instance, if it's in a language that the information seeker doesn't speak, or if it's redundant with information that the information seeker has already seen. So those are some things that would constitute the user-oriented definition of relevance. So these perspectives then correspond to the constructivism as described by Lemon, and constructivism sort of underlies the learning theory that's described by Skemp, and constructivism and positivism are pitted against each other as different ways of understanding and using and building systems to support information use in the article by Leadham et al. So let's take another visit with our iconic professional. His or her charge is to understand and or manage information, information seekers, and information systems. Managing means organizing and labeling information resources in such a way that three things happen. Number 1, the meaning of the information resource is captured. Number 2, information seekers can find the resources even given their particular needs, abilities, and characteristics. And number 3, the technical requirements of the information system are met so that resources can be retrieved when appropriate. Each of the 3 readings that you read for this session speaks to some aspect of these tasks that the information professional undertakes. So if we think about the information user on the one hand and the information system and information on the other hand, the philosophical aspect of the discussion fits more with the system side. LBSC 670 is about the organization of information. Organizing information entails segmenting units of information. For instance, are we dealing with an entire book, or with chapters of a book, with an entire serial, or with the individual issues in a serial, or with the individual articles that are in the issues of the serial? That's what segmenting is about. Organizing also entails gathering, collection development, and deciding whether or not it belongs with the collection that you oversee. And organizing also entails labeling the information, and we learned from Skimp how important labeling is to describing information. All aspects of organizing require some interpretation on the part of the information professional. They are interpreting the information itself that's being organized. They are also interpreting the context within which the information exists. They might be looking at the context from which the information came, something about where the information was published, or who it was published by, or who wrote it, or what kind of, that goes into gathering and what kind of collection it belongs to. The context within which the information exists also has to do with the context of whatever the information organization is that the information professional works for. So if the context is a law library, certain things will be more or less germane to that kind of collection than they would be for a public library or for an academic library. Understanding the user side then has more to do with the psychology, which we got some of from the Limon article, but which we mostly got from the Skemp article. In that case, we're looking at the mind of the user. We're looking at learning and cognition. We use philosophy to look at information systems. Now we use psychology to examine the role and characteristics of the information seeker. You see in the diagram that the mind of the user is engaged in a two-way interaction with the information and the information system. In reality, the two-way interaction with the information only exists in a collaborative or Web 2.0 type environments, where the user can influence the information content by tagging or commenting. In traditional information environments, there's only a one-way interaction from the information to the information user. The information user can't affect the content of a book or an article after the book or article has been published in a print environment. But it's always a two-way interaction between the information user and the information system, whether that system is an information professional like a human being, or whether it's a hard system, a computer system, because the user is inputting a query and then the system is giving back results. And then the user is making selections from those results, and the system is reciprocating by giving more information about the individual selections. And this sort of goes on as a dialogue between the user and the system. So when we try to understand the mind of the user, the reason why we do so is because of the information seeking process. Information is organized by information professionals. Everything we do as information professionals, the reason why we exist is because of the information seeking process. It's because the information seeking process exists, and it's because of the things we know about the nature of the information seeking process and the nature of information seekers, and also the things that we know about information. But even if the information existed, if there were no information seekers, we wouldn't bother with all of the things we do to transform and organize and manage and describe information. It's because of the information seekers and the information seeking process that we do all of this stuff we do, the search engines, the databases, the catalogs, the indexes, the almanacs. All of that stuff is done to facilitate the information seeking process. And why does the information seeking process need to occur? Because sometimes somebody needs to know something. And in order for somebody to know something new, a learning process needs to occur. Someone needs to learn new information in order to accomplish whatever their underlying goals are. And our job as information professionals is to make it possible for people to find the information that will help them learn what we need to know. So in that way, the organization of information is in part a teaching process. We do need to take into account an understanding of pedagogy and an understanding of the cognitive learning processes of the user so that we can accommodate those processes when we present information to them. There are two different perspectives of the information need that are introduced on this slide. One of those is the knowledge gap presented by Brenda Durbin, and the other is the anomalous state of knowledge, which is described in a series of papers by Nick Belkin. Both of those are, living, breathing information science researchers. I think Brenda Durbin is at UCLA, but I might be wrong about that. Nick Belkin is and has for a long time been at Rutgers. Anyway, Durbin is the one who really wrote out the sense-making theory as we understand it in information science. And part of her sense-making theory says that a person is going along doing what they want to do, and sometimes they are stopped. They come to a gap in their knowledge that prevents them from continuing along their current path. And so the way she puts it, in order to continue along the path, the gap needs to be filled, and it needs to be filled with something called information. Of course, it can't just be any information. It needs to be the information that allows the user to continue on the current path. So the idea is that the information need is a gap in knowledge. Nick Belkin describes the information need as an anomalous state of knowledge. He calls this the ask hypothesis. Write that down for your notes. It will be on an exam or a future assignment or something. I think the ask hypothesis is really important. What Belkin is saying with the ask hypothesis is that when we do have this knowledge gap or an information need, as we hear about from all sorts of theorists like Wilson and Taylor and Durbin, what's going on is that we have an anomalous state of knowledge, and that the problem is that we don't know enough about this thing that we don't know to be able to capably articulate our information need to an information system. Sometimes the information need is such that you don't have the vocabulary, you don't have the appropriate schemas, to use Skemp's term, to be able to identify when you see relevant information, much less formulate a capable query that could retrieve the right information out of an information system. So Belkin says that information systems need to take into account that sometimes the person who's seeking information on a topic is so, not to use this in the pejorative sense, but so ignorant of that topic that they can't formulate the kind of query that a traditional system would just match the words of the query with the words in a document and return the right kinds of documents. So information systems should be constructed in a way that allows for the user to gradually construct, there's that word again, to gradually construct an understanding of the topic space and refine their understanding enough that they can both formulate queries to retrieve relevant documents, and so that they have enough background information, or that they can start gradually constructing a schema so that they can identify relevant information and assimilate it into their existing knowledge base. So in all of these ways, again, there is a teaching or a pedagogical component to the organization and presentation of information in information retrieval environments.